All right, so this is the final update for 2381X. It's February 24th, and I just got back from provincials. And I guess we didn't make worlds, that's okay. We weren't expecting to. Would have been cool if we did, but yeah. So this is the final update of our robot here. So let's just start at the front and work our way sort of back. This here is actually a scraper. So what it does is it can come down and basically if you have a cap in front of the robot, it flips the cap back and then tilts the cap back and then you roll the balls into your intake. This friction mat here is so that we could actually take it, have the scraper down and it would pull on the cap, and this would be enough friction for it to flip the cap over while we're driving backwards. The bending on this was done, this entire assembly was done quite late, and there's just 2 bars on each side for triangle bracing. Again, our black nylon screws, and there's this new half cut that Vaxel, so it looks like steel, it's actually aluminum. The banding for this was quite simple. It's just your normal 3-point triangle banding, except it's sort of like our cap intake from earlier on. It locks on the way down here, and it locks on the way up there. So it pulls back up this way when it's all the way up, and it pulls down towards the ground all the way down. So that way when it's all the way down, we don't risk burning out the single motor that we have on it. That's enough force just to keep the cap, so we can bring it down and then just let the motor do whatever. And then on the way back, tilting up the cap, that's enough to set it up high enough where when we just stop, momentum brings it back up. That band's also quite old. It's been outside and freezing, and it's not quite tensioned the way it should be. Let's see if I can force it to be tensioned the way it should be. Hold on. So now if it's up about here, there's a point of like equivalence there. We'll pass it and we'll go all the way back up. So that's how that works. There's a pot on this side. So that's a bearing, that's a lock bar. There's a bunch of spacers down there. There's a shaft, there's a pillow bearing, nylon screws here. We didn't have a nylon screw that was going to fit here, so we just used those. We use a lock bar so that you get a reading off the pot. I didn't want to use just the lock bar because it might have been moving around a bit too much, so we also used a bearing, which is why if you look at it, this side's actually taller than that side. It's because on this side, there's the intake chain where you can't get, that to be all the way in. And it's asymmetrical, but you know what? Keep those at 5 segments because we're going to use that half cut again. This entire assembly here is just mounted on a standoff. Nothing super special. We ran out of spacers, so we just used stacked ones. There is a brace here. Yeah, there's a brace underneath the dog. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a bar there that goes from this 3-wide right here to the standoff here, and that actually prevents this entire assembly from wobbling back and forth too much. Now on the other side, you just have pillow bearing and a screw going through there. These used to be nylon, then we hit somebody and everything broke, so we went back to just steel because we don't have aluminum. And that's got these spacers on the bottom, which hold it up. And then here's actually something that we put in because this C-channel here was just wobbling around a bit, so we put a screw and then put a bunch of spacers through and then screwed it down, and that helps reduce the amount of wobble we get from this. It actually gets transferred all the way down. This was necessary because that's actually a chain tensioner. It keeps the chain back there off the wheels. I think that was the only place we managed to get it to fit where it wouldn't hit the wheels, and it would also get the chain to clear everything and have a good tension. So that's going to stay. This again is to hold our main intake shaft. So before we get to the intake, let's talk about our parking sleds. So these are our parking sleds. These are designed to help us get onto the platform. This probably isn't the best way to do it. We have C-channel on the inside and the C-channel on the outside. The issue we were having before is that not a C-channel. The bar on the outside used to bend a lot, and you can actually see here where it's been bending inwards just due to the force of hitting the platform so many times. The inner C-channel, however, because it's been such a short distance, is incredibly hard to bend. So we can use that to support this one. We have one long standoff there, which actually just holds it in place. And then you have this, that's a screw, that's a nut, and then these are just 2 spacers. And the spacers can't fall out because there's something on the other end holding it in. So that provides enough support for this thing not to bend in too much, while having a smooth surface on the outside for us to be able to climb. That's just screwed down because that's our intake, and the more support we get there, the better. And then that's screwed in all the way at the end. And thank God that C-channel hasn't broken somehow. The screw head is actually behind the wheel, so the wheel will climb before the screw head does, which is pretty nice. There is no box bolting here because I didn't think it was necessary. The intake itself, I think I'm on a cable back there. Yeah. The intake itself is just a 6-tooth on this side. That's just a shaft going across. There's a shaft collar in the inside there, and a shaft collar on the outside there. That inside inner shaft collar is just using the set screw it comes with, and it's not had an issue so far. The other side, this shaft collar here, actually has had quite a few issues with the set screw falling out. So we gave up on using a set screw in there, and we just took nylon screws. We took a lock bar. This can be whatever, it doesn't matter. It could have been a plate, just we had a lock bar on hand. And we screwed it down so that it was pressing against this shaft collar here. We used a free spinning insert on the gear so that, you know, this would work nicely. So that holds that shaft in and prevents it from falling out. The intake itself is standoffs. We just 3-wide plate across the middle. Don't do this. We got hit here once or twice, and you can tell that it's been bent pretty badly. And like even just, you know, hitting a post is enough to bend this pretty badly. So use a C channel or use 4 standoffs or get something stronger than 2 standoffs. Although, you know, they were spaced to fit nicely. The bands, all we did was you can see this here, tie 2 bands together, loop them around, and then they go on the ends here. You get this 1/2-inch screw with an eye lock on the end. Same deal on the other side, and that's enough to keep the bands on. Again, if you're going to do this, just be careful for entanglement. That was our biggest issue, and we got a band ripped clean off there during a match. This is looser than having bands go straight across, and you know, it's worked better for us, and it might work for you, I don't know. This thing here is our priority, which is when you get 2 balls feeding in this way, they'll get jammed here. This just makes the ball on this side go a little bit on a different path, just enough so that the other ball can feed upwards into sort of like the main funnel first, so we don't have that jamming issue. There's just a piece of friction mat there to help it get up over the ledge of the C channel, and that's not actually held down by much, it's just sort of hanging there. These are just pieces of plastic that we cut out. Balls were skipping over this 1x, so we put these here, and that just solved the skipping issue on both sides. Moving up the intake, we have a large, I think this is 24-tooth sprocket on the intake. That's directly driven by a high-speed motor. We used to run turbo, but it stalled too much. That's just a big 24-tooth sprocket. Our second stage is back here. That's also a 6-tooth, just because a 12-tooth actually physically wouldn't fit for the bracing for our tails. We'll talk about it in a second. But that's on a pillow bearing, that's on a pillow bearing, that's on an actual bearing. This shaft actually is going all the way across to this piece of 5-wide. We never actually swapped this 5-wide out for pillow bearings. We probably should have on standoffs, but you know what? It stayed here, and it's done fine. This entire intake just has bands going across. That's nothing special, nothing that you haven't seen before, right? It's the same size, and it just brings the ball up. We used 1x bars on the inside of the intake because, first of all, nobody's going to hit you there, and second of all, we realized that 1x bars actually center the ball a lot better than just a 5-wide plate. Because on a plate, there's no like groove for the ball to fall into. With this, there's a groove that the ball will naturally want to fall into. So even if it's slightly off, once it gets into here, it'll just fall into that groove, which was really nice. And then it would feed up to our indexer, which I'll talk about in a second again. But this thing here is actually because we were having issues where the ball would, like from the side, it would just pop out the front this way. That standoff was our fix that we came up with. We didn't really bother coming up with a better fix. We didn't have the time to, and that just kept the ball in. That's a nylon screw, and this is constrained on 2 ends, so it's basically a triangle. There's one on the tower there, and then one that comes all the way down to here, and that just holds this thing in place. It does clip the elastics, but that's okay. All right, again, this intake is just 2 standoffs. We used to have a bar going across the top, but the chain jammed against that one too much, so we just got rid of it, and it's been fine without it. Okay, indexer. Indexer is super simple. It's just 2 18-tooth sprockets. It's mounted on a pillow bearing on this side. That was the most cancerous pillow bearing to get in because we had to put this one on after we put this on. for our flywheel, but we'll talk about that in a second. There's our spacers because I didn't want to shaft color into a pillow bearing. It's just annoying. You'll notice these are nylon. These aren't nylon. These were just too hard to replace, and we didn't have the time to. So that's our indexer, and I'll talk about the sensors in there in a second. But you've got this. Again, it's a 6-tooth sprocket. We could have made it a 12-tooth, but we wanted sort of that RPM that a 6-tooth sprocket would have given us. And there's just spacers on each side so that you can get shaft collars on to keep it in place. And it's actually fallen out of being perfectly parallel as we've hit the intake a few times, and things have moved and we've done quick repairs. But it was parallel, I promise, at the start of the time. Okay, so that leads us to actually powering the indexer. So we've got this system here which powers a scraper, right? And it's, again, a non-parallel 4-bar. So it comes all the way down here, and then it comes all the way, it's not even a 4-bar. What is this? It's almost a non-parallel. Is it? Pretend there's a bar here, right? And then it's a non-parallel 4-bar. So you bring this down, and it brings this out, and it's magical, right? So the first thing you can hear is that clicking noise. That's actually a ratchet. A ratchet was super simple. This part wasn't necessary. I just want to see how this sort of setup would work. It was mostly to try it and see if I could ever use it somewhere else. How this works is you get shaft couplers inside of this. You put a shaft collar in between two standoffs, and the shaft collar on the end, and then you can screw down through these. I don't want to use spacers, so I just use these. I didn't want to use washers, so I just used the black spacers, and those did just about enough. And then these were just to space it out a little bit more. But then you can get sort of this thing hanging off the edge with these two anchor points, and this is actually a lot stronger than I thought it would be. Like it's pretty good. That just rubber bands up. Let's see if we can get in here. Let's see where I need to get into here. That holds up this standoff, which is actually which is going into the gear there. So I can spin the gear one way, but on the other direction it locks, which is super great. This is a 1-to-1 ratio on a torque motor. Oh my god, my cables. Hold the cable. Thank you. This is 1-to-1, so if I were to do it again, I wouldn't go 1-to-1, I'd go like 1-to-5 turbo, but this is 1-to-1 torque, so it's a 60 into a 60. This is a bar on the side just to make sure that everything's not cantilevered. Should we have used a half cut here? Probably. Did we? No. Why not? I'm lazy. It's actually, like, there used to be a screw in here. It fell out at some point in testing. We never bothered to replace it. So that's where we're at. This shaft was also never cut down to size. But inside there's just a whole bunch of bearings spacing everything out in one shaft collar. Again, a giant 24-tooth gear going to 6. That gives us 400 RPM on the indexer. I wouldn't go below 200 RPM for an indexer. It's just too slow. All right, so that's the indexer. That's this assembly here. There's a bunch of nylon screws on all of this stuff, just because that's what we decided to use when we built it. And then that, I guess, leads me into the flywheel gearbox. How do I want to do this? Okay, so let's talk about the flywheel towers first. That's a good idea. So our towers are mounted. You'll notice that we've got this tower on the side, right? And there's no actual diagonal bracing on our flywheel towers, and we never needed any. What we have instead is, I don't know if you can see down here, but in here we've got, hold on, focus. We've got, these two C-channels on the side. Hold on, this might be a better angle. We've got these two C-channels on the side. This one's box bolted all the way through, just for, not moving around. This one isn't box bolted because it wasn't necessary. That side isn't box bolted either, but basically these two C-channels have screws on either side which hold down the big tower. You'll notice that we have 3 nylocks and 1 caps. Basically what happened was caps fell out and we decided to replace them with nylocks. So that caps up there that you see is Survivor, and he's never fallen off. Everybody else has fallen off like 10 times now. I don't know what we did differently with that one, but it stayed on. It's the same thing on the other side as well. I basically mirrored it, except there's no box bolt on that inside area. That inside that has no box bolt because you've got 2 screws onto the tower. That standoff as well on the inside isn't box bolted. You can see it just in between the 5 wide and the 2 wide. It's not box bolted. And it wasn't super necessary for us to box bolt it. It's not box bolted on either side. We did find that the towers work a little bit better when they're actually resting on a C channel, so we get them that way. But it's super simple. We just have this sort of, screws happening, and like it's not wobbly if you just get everything right. So, oh boy, flywheel gearbox. Okay, so 2 motors. This is a 60-tooth gear. It goes up into a 12-tooth gear that you can see in between there. That's a 36, and there's the final 12. This entire assembly is actually held up with that 2 wide here, that 2 wide there, and a bar down here. We couldn't move the 2 wide any lower for clearance issues, and that bar just seemed to do the job. It is probably not parallel. At some point somebody hit it and we could never get it to be good again, but it's worked fine enough for us. There is that shaft, I think, on this gear was the only one that we actually cut down because we didn't want it to hit the indexer, right? So that's just got 60-tooth, a shaft collar, which is very loose, by the way. I don't know how it hasn't come out yet, and a spacer, which is very free spinning. And then we've got your bigger shaft. This one wasn't cut down to size, it was just whatever Vex sold us. You've got a shaft collar in there. That one I hope isn't loose. I guess we can try it. Yeah, it holds. You've got these 2 black spacers. You have to be sure to use black spacers here, because otherwise you're gonna hit the 12-tooth, and that's something we realized a little bit late. There's a little play there. I bet there was probably a Teflon in there at some point that we took out when we rebuilt it or something. But that was never cut down to size just because we didn't need to, and time costs also if it was imperfect. This part is interesting because you've got a 12-tooth black spacer, big 36-tooth sprocket, spacers, 2 Teflon washers, and then the bearing on the outside. There used to be a shaft collar here, and there used to be a shaft collar on the other side. But at some point they both fell off, and then friction was the only thing keeping it in, and it's done an admirable job. Off of that second 12-tooth gear, we have a shaft going all the way out. We use a shaft connector here just because that means that this actual encoder can be not perfectly parallel, and it would still sort of compensate for that because we were having issues with mounting this thing perfectly in line. We tried our best and then realized that just putting this thing in and giving a little bit of space would be super good. And then that's just a normal shaft collar. This used to be nylon, but we got hit by another robot and it broke. So then I was like, nope, we're gonna go to steel. That nylon screw we actually couldn't get out, so I guess it's staying until it breaks. On the other side again, steel, because that entire thing broke. So screw here broke, screw there broke. That screw didn't break. Weird. Also, that bar's not cut down to size. Yes, I know. I'm very well aware. This is a standoff that used to go onto this thing, but this thing had to be moved up because of reasons. So yeah, but yeah, this bearing does have 2 shafts going through it. We've always done our sort of final 12-tooth that way. Gravity works with you this way, and it's also just a lot more compact. And there is definitely enough space in there for those 2, that shaft coupler and that shaft collar, and gear to just have their own space to live and breathe. So this is doable, and this is 4 holes across. Probably could have made it less. Should I have? Probably not. This probably could have been half cut. Never had time to do it. That is all. This is just this is actually, this is just a random piece of C channel that we had to brace off of there because we didn't want a super long shaft going all the way across. We did want the indexer to be even though, so we sort of just made it like that, which is weird because you've got this box of space. We originally had standoffs going across, but it wasn't being parallel, so we just went screw it and went to 2 C channels. They've got 4 screws each. There's 2 in there and there's 2 in there. These are all caps. They never fell out for some reason, even though flywheel was the biggest vibrating thing ever. So that's interesting. We were noticing, however, that this entire C channel on the inside was vibrating a lot when you ran the flywheel. So our programmer was like, hey, why not put a steel bar across the top? So we put a steel bar across the top and then put a standoff attaching to the brace going all the way across. This has come loose at some point, probably during a competition. Never made a difference. So this was probably just for a pseudo effect. But you know what? If it makes him happy, it made the flywheel a lot less loud, so I'll take it. The towers are both too tall, but you know what? I never cut them. So that is that. Let's talk about this thing here. This is actually, so the flywheel geometry from this robot and the 20 wide robot is almost the exact same. I looked at the spacing here and the angle of the hood and the distances from that point to that point and that point to the top. It's almost the exact same as a 20 wide, which is interesting because, you know, I built it thinking it would be different. But basically that's a piece of Delrin that screws into some bars. Let's see if I can get a better angle here. It screws into some bars there, and then your main intake guides come out from the side. This intake guide is actually acting as a hanger for sort of that line tracker. And on the other side, it's also, you can sort of see it here. It comes up and then into there, which is pretty cool. The intake here, this is actually really strong for the standoffs, and I can't move it. You got one box bolt, because I was in a box bolt frenzy. The other one's not box bolted because there's a screw going through the top, and at some point there's probably something else going across there anyways, maybe the standoff. So this is a full, you know, C-channel. Probably could have done with half cut. Did I want to spend time going in there and switching it out? Probably not. But you've got this thing on this side. It's the exact same on the other side. There's going to be, you see, there's two screws there, two standoffs, and a box bolt down there. Very fancy. That hood then goes all the way up into a full C-channel going across, and then these are standoffs coming down to, I'll show you on the other side, it'll be easier to see. These come down into actually a C-channel where, you know, the standoffs go into C-channel. You can adjust the holes that the standoffs go into, which one of these you want. You can also adjust which hole that C-channel actually attaches to. We had to use nylon because it kept coming loose. Like, no matter how tight you would get them, they would just come loose. So we went to Nylox. Like, we literally bent C-channels trying to get caps down. So, you know, that's just a 1/2 inch spacer. This gives us a lot of adjustments in terms of compression, angle, and etc. This is what we settled on. Looks familiar because it probably is the same as 20 wide almost. Oh, my phone! So that's the hood. That's this part. You'll notice that there's an empty weird gap in the middle. That's because we originally intended for our like feeding to be vertical, but it never worked out that way. Like, it was originally supposed to be flywheels up here, right? And then you feed down here. So you're supposed to get a vertical area like right here, sort of like 99U, but that never worked out. So we just got this thing, which is honestly a shorter intake path, and I'm okay with that. Okay, this is the part that gets a little bit messy because it's difficult to see everything. Let's do it on this side first. So if you haven't counted yet, we've got 4 motors already covered. The rest of the motors are on the drive base. You've got 4 motors on each side of the drive base, all linked to 36 tooth gears. Hold on, let me actually just, give me 2 seconds. Let's find a pair of scissors and actually cut this off. Snip. Are you gonna be strong enough? Okay, hold on, knife. Where's the knife, boy? Hold on. So, I have dented my table, cutting a zip tie with a knife. So we're gonna be careful and not do that again. Do I have side cutters? I do not have side cutters. Good question. Thank you for asking. But this is a pain to get off. Oh my god, I dented the table again, look. I've got 2 dents in my tables now. That's unfortunate. And then these are nylon screws. This is gonna be a pain to take out. Look at this. Nylon screws, these are very wonderful. You see that we've got empty 3-wire leads. These actually are just empty wires that we wired in case one of these longer wires decided to break. We would have one already sort of up there. This actually just does a loop back here, which means that if something breaks, we can cut a few zip ties and have it out of the way. These standoffs here, while I'm back here, these are rear flag togglers, so we can toggle low flags in almost any direction. This thing here is scratched up because that's the plate that we push people with, and it's also a plate that we can use to flip cats by just driving backwards, which is very fun and interesting and intriguing. Our power expander is mounted up here. That's a nylon nut on a steel screw because good build quality. That's just standing off on a bar. I think it was standing off on a bar for like being able to get into it or something. But you've got power cables running across the bottom here. So one into the Cortex and one into the power expander right there. And with that backplate removed, you can see the rest of everything else. So wiring plate is the same as 20 watt, it's just mounted here. It works as protection so balls don't get stuck inside of a robot as well, but mostly so that we have something to talk about for the judges and so that I can replace things if they break. All of our drive is split off of Y cables on the Cortex. So you can see that there's 2 Y cables coming off of each of these, and those just go straight into the Cortex. You've got this bundle of 4 wires coming out of the middle. Those 4 wires go into the power expander. 2 of them are for the flywheel, and 1 is for the intake, and 1 is for the index. Okay, so motors. You can see them clearly on this side. Let's turn the robot around. Alright, so you've got 1 motor, 2 motor, 3 motor, 4 motor all the way in there. And those are all geared off of 36 tooth gears. So you've got 1 way back on the inside, 1 in the middle, 1 back here, and then the final 36 tooth is right here. That's on the same shaft as the 60 tooth gear, which drives the other 60 tooth gear, which means that you're on a 1-to-1 with the turbo. Same thing on the other side. This outer plate here is held on with 3 screws, 1, 2, and 3, which means that if something breaks, we take this off. You can rip out the shafts, and we can replace the motors faster than we can with zip ties, which is quite an achievement if you ask me. The Cortex is mounted on standoffs, not on screws, because I was lazy. Sort of held up there. This C channel here was really just to make sure that I didn't break like a tab on my Cortex, because I wasn't sure if it would break. Tracking wheels. Okay, ignore the center tracking wheel. This is not how you're supposed to do it. This was... No, just no. Okay, now we continue. You've got your tracking wheels on the side. So we were scared originally that cantilevering these wheels would break something, which never actually happened, which is really good. So these encoders did hold up very nicely, very well. The rubber bands may have shifted a little bit, and those screws might now be a little bit bent, but the encoders themselves are okay. So the wheel is super simple, just a shaft, the wheel, the encoder, right? That's just a little piece of 1x, that goes into the screw, goes into here. There's 2 screws holding these down. An eye lock back there that's loose enough that I can wiggle it around by hand, and this screw here. We noticed that at the start, this was wobbling too much because of those 2 contact points just being awkward. So we take this entire standoff and put it across the back, and then now it's stable and also acts as a nice piece of material to ram people with. But yeah, the drive motors, they've got no bearings motor side, which sometimes leads to me drilling holes in C channels. And they've got nylon on non-essentials or where nylon will fit on this side for the bearings. That's our final 60 tooth gear, and that goes into a 60 tooth on this side, which is bolted to an 18 tooth gear. And then you've also got screws just going all the way through. So let's see if I can get a better picture. So you see that we've got 1 screw on each side, a set of screws on each side that are just bolted and not all the way through the wheel. And then if we turn the wheel a little bit, you'll get a screw that's, oh look, bolted all the way through the wheel. That means that we don't transfer power through this shaft, which is nice. Was 5.5 necessary? Probably not. Did I use it? Yes. And I think that's about it for the robot. That's a backup battery mount. It fit nicely in there. This is the chain up front. It's chained to a sprocket up front, and it goes into the wheel. We chose not to split the inner. So split inner is basically when you've got the inside split. We decided not to split it because you know, it was just easier to build it with a C-channel all the way across. As you can see, there's a little bit of dead space on that side, but you know what, it worked okay, turned out okay. Let's flip the robot onto its back so we can look at the inside. So again, we have actually a lot of stuff going across the bottom. This was originally done because this is our only like full cross brace, which is probably not great. I mean, there's the one on the back, but that actually doesn't do much. So this is box bolted to the inside on both sides, where you've got the C-channel then going across. This is honestly not necessary, but if we took it out, it broke the intake, and I didn't have time to fix that type of thing, so we kept it in. These standoffs are there to help brace these two sides to prevent flex. This does a fine job. It's fine. You've got, you know, just like, sort of like a 1x hanger for your sensor mounts. That's an accelerometer that we used for angle detection and filtering. And then you can see the insides, those are our motors. This is the weirdest thing you'll ever see. It's actually just a bunch of screws into standoffs. So these two standoffs go into the 5 wide for my drive gearing, and these ones actually go from the cross brace. Why didn't you go all the way through? Because this was put on later, and I'm stupid. So that's that. Sensors I talked about. Let me talk about this sensor right here. So this is actually a priming sensor. So when you get a ball in your flywheel, balls have momentum, right? So we had one ball come up and it would sit here nicely. Second ball come up and it would sit there nicely. But the time it would take to fire that ball was about 1.5 seconds. Maybe I'm exaggerating. It was quite a long time, right? Just because you had to get it actually like over that bump. Normally on a bigger intake, you might not necessarily have this issue, especially if it's flat. But the ball sits pretty low. It's below the index or sprocket, right? Just to be safe. So when we hit that prime button, what's going to happen is it runs the intake and index slowly to bring the ball just up until it's touching the flywheel, or just about to touch the flywheel. So then as soon as I let go of the button to fire, it's almost an instantaneous shot for me to fire. This does have to be calibrated for different lighting conditions, however. Sometimes it just doesn't detect the ball nicely, so just be aware of that. That's an issue that we had and we later fixed. These are pots for autonomous selection. They're just sort of there. I wouldn't use them if I were you, but you know, yeah. This mesh is to prevent balls from falling into our robot. Actually, it's not to look cool or do anything really. I think that's actually everything. Yay! Robot.